Everyone, this is the vlog for Ozzy's life through the true lens of True Sidereal Astrology. I wanted to have some of his music as the intro, but of course there would be copyright issues, so we'll have to go without. All right, so let's get into it. So I was really happy and really excited, and it sounds so fitting for him to be a Sun in Scorpio in True Sidereal. Of course, he was nicknamed the Prince of Darkness. Ozzy, according to True Sidereal, is a Scorpio sun, and he was darkly mysterious, intense, passionate, and determined with a deep desire to understand humanity. For example, we have a song, one of many, and this example that I used is Mr. Crowley. You know, it's very 8th house Scorpio vibes. And of course, Scorpio rules the 8th house. And the 8th house is all about esoterics and research and the human psyche. And so, and Ozzy, of course, displayed that type of vibe in a lot of his songs. And he has, of course, he was magnetic, charismatic, and deeply thoughtful. That's all very Scorpio vibe and 8th house as well. All right. So for his moon, our moon represents the internal and emotional state, whereas the sun represents our external state. So it makes sense that Ozzy was that Scorpio sun externally. The world viewed him as this Scorpio person, but his moon, he was born during a waxing crescent in Sagittarius. So internally and emotionally, he was adventurous. He liked to travel. He wanted to explore. He wanted to be a free spirit. And so all of those things are very Sagittarius in nature. So he was also curious and had this joy and spark for life. So when you're born during a waxing crescent, there's this desire to break new ground. However, you can get kind of torn between breaking new ground and being traditional. So obviously we know which road Ozzy took. But along with having when you have a waxing crescent and you're born with the waxing crescent moon phase, you also will encounter many obstacles in your life, and there's this need to overcome those obstacles. And so, of course, when they were a bit younger, Sharon and Ozzy were both a bit at the same place at the same time, where Ozzy had just been basically kicked out of Black Sabbath for his addiction issues. And Sharon had been going through a similar issue with her father's record label in that industry not doing as great. And so they came together and were really able to help each other build up a new life together. So these people who were born during a waxing crescent usually see the most of their success in their 20s and 30s. And of course, this is when Ozzy rose to fame. All right. So then we're going to go ahead and talk about just a couple of the significant placements that the moon has in his natal chart. And so he had, of course, the Sagittarius stellium, which we'll get into that a little bit later. But his moon was conjunct both Mars and Jupiter in the second house. So we can say that he was internally driven to create a stable financial life for himself and his family that he could expand and grow. Because Jupiter will expand any planet or aspect that he touches. And we can see in his life, he expanded his empire. All right. So now we're going to go to the 12th house, and we're going to talk about his Venus in his south node and what that all means. So he had his Venus in Virgo within his 12th house, and there was this at times desire to escape reality through alcohol and substance abuse. The 12th house is it's ruled by Neptune, and Neptune is the planet that we may that relates to some substance abuse habits. And so with it being in the 12th house, we have Venus in his 12th house. So he desired to escape. He probably liked that feeling. And so at first. So, and also the 12th house is related to hospitals and institutions. And we know that Ozzy spent some time in rehab. Well, then you look at his Venus there in that 12th house as well, which represents not only desires, but relationships and your intimate relationships. And we know that at one point, Sharon she had wanted him to go to rehab, but he didn't. And so she had kind of devised a plan that he didn't know of at one point. He was told he was going somewhere. And in reality, she was sending him to rehab to try and help him out. And so we can see, of course, there's that Venus in the 12th house and how deeply it affected his personal relationships. And then with his Venus conjunct that South Node, the South Node is all about your past karma. The nodes are very karmic in nature. And so his relationships were karmic. Yeah. So he was here to really try to clear that karmic cycle. And what's beautiful about it being in the 12th house is the 12th house is also associated with endings. So it tells me that he was ending this karmic cycle with not only probably Sharon, but many others who he had relationships with, and we'll get into that. So the 12th house is also associated with hidden enemies. So, and it was widely known that Ozzy had a few, people that he didn't quite get along with, and they didn't see eye to eye. And at one point, he had viewed a couple of people as enemies. But of course, he didn't end his life that way. But it was that way. Ronnie James Dio became Ozzy's replacement in Black Sabbath. It led to a tumultuous relationship. And Tony from Black Sabbath, they didn't see eye to eye, of course, And so that's all, once again, he was partners with Black Sabbath, the people from Black Sabbath. And so that's also very Venus, 7th house. And of course, Venus rules the 7th house. So, of course, we can say that these relationships were probably karmic in nature as well. And he was here to clear that karma with those relationships as well. And then here we have Pluto square his Venus. So this is kind of telling a story that Ozzy had some fears related to power and control dynamics within his relationships that he was meant to transform. Likely he felt them on a strong internal level. Pluto was very subconscious in nature. I think that at one point, he became very consciously aware that this was going on. But a lot of times it's very unconscious in nature because he was born with Pluto retrograde. It usually stays internally, the thoughts of fears and the power and control dynamics. He might have felt a certain way that he not always acted on. All right. So now we're going to move on to his Chiron wound. And the Chiron wound in a natal chart and in astrology represents your wounds that you are here to heal. These are, of course, deep wounds that can stem from past life experiences. And of course, if we have those wounds and they stem from past lives, we will experience similar dynamics in this life until we heal that wound. We bring that along with us. So for Ozzy, his Chiron wound was in the 1st house, and this was around, of course, 1st house is around your personal identity, your physical appearance. So he was often conflicted about being called the Prince of Darkness at times and wanted people to know that he was not evil. And so he talks about having this whole persona, outward persona, which is very 1st house, that he felt conflicted with at times. All right. So his Chiron wound is actually on the cusp of Scorpio and Libra, which further, influences the confliction that he had. So he has this, of course, this 1st house Scorpio vibe, but he also has this desire to feel peaceful inside, to be harmonious inside, and to clear these Chiron wounds and feel more balanced as a human. And so with it right there smack dab on the cusp here, we can see he was just very conflicted. And so he strived. He, of course, going through his life, it's likely that internally he is really striving to become at peace with himself. All right. And with Chiron conjunct Mercury, right next to Mercury, it suggests that his wounds were spoken out loud. He communicated them. And of course, he communicated them through song, which his Mercury is in Scorpio. And so this is communicated through song, very deep, once again, very Scorpio / 8th house vibes. And so some examples are Suicide Solution, which addresses the dangers and consequences of alcohol and drug abuse. Mama, I'm Coming Home was a song of longing, regret, and the search for peace, which there we go. That Libra, that Chiron on that Scorpio Libra cusp there that he was searching for after years of chaos and self-destruction. And then we have Under the Graveyard, which represented depression and the struggle to overcome it. Then we have the album titled Ordinary Man, and it reflects what he desired yet eluded him for so long. So Ozzy often wondered if he was really liked by his fans, and he would often ask people that were backstage, tell me, is everyone here? People would often tell him, yeah, you're totally booked, Ozzy, and he just couldn't believe it, And I think until the last time, he couldn't believe it. He always wondered if people were going to show up. So this does reflect that Chiron wound in the first house of self, his personal identity, and how people saw him. So let's talk about his career. This is a really neat portion. So Saturn in the natal chart and in astrology represents a wide variety of different things. One representing your career, your job, your work, what you do. Because Saturn is all about responsibilities. What are your responsibilities in life, and how do you work to attain them? And so, of course, Saturn is placed in his home, in his natural home in the 10th house, which he does very well in the 10th house. And in his chart, Ozzy's chart, it's in Leo, which makes perfect sense because he creatively expressed in his career. His was creative expression. And with Saturn being conjunct to his MC, it shows that his career was in the public eye, and was exactly what he was supposed to be doing. What's also interesting is Ozzy has in the 10th house, all conjunct each other, as we have Lilith. And Lilith in astrology has 3 different types of Liliths. And this particular one that I'm showing is the only physical representation. So she is an asteroid in the sky. The other 2 they're theoretical points. They're not physical objects in the sky like this one is. And so with Lilith as the physical object, we can say that this was so Lilith is all about rebellion, freedom, independence, taboo issues, and going against the grain. And so we can kind of see in his career, he expressed those type of things, societal freedom, liberation. He expressed that Lilith vibe through his voice when he sang. And so we have songs like War Pigs, which was a song about the Vietnam War at the time and being against it. And of course, if you listen to the song, it talks about, all kinds of things, and, going against, talking about the government and what they do to the people. So that's a very Lilith right there as well. Of course, we have Mr. Crowley again. And when he rose to fame, many felt that his very presence alone was taboo, of course, back in the 80s. All right. Then, of course, we have that Pluto in the 9th house. And so Ozzy's Pluto is on the 9th house, close to the 10th house in Leo, which suggests since Pluto represents fears, shadows, and issues of power and control. And of course, Pluto, like I had said, is so slow moving, and it's a very unconscious part of us for the majority, for the most part of our lives. We can act upon our Pluto shadows and not always be super aware that that's what we're doing. So practicing mindfulness and becoming very aware of the self is very helpful. But for Ozzy, he had his Pluto on that very close to the 10th house. So it suggests fears around publishing. So his songs, his writings, of course, there's more fears about what society is going to think about him, what he's going to be thought of. Is this good enough? There was fears around that. Likely, not all of these fears were likely expressed outwardly, but they were probably very much felt internally. Also, fears around foreign affairs. In a 2022 interview, he had stated that he wanted to go back to the UK due to the political BS, which is very ninth house territory within the US, and particularly all the killing. So he wanted to leave the US due to politics and fears about politics. And that's very Pluto in the ninth house as well. All right. Now we're going to talk about Uranus, which this planet is all about rebellion, freedom, independence, and especially Uranus will bring shock and surprise. And Uranus, the planet itself, is comprised of lightning storms. And so when that lightning comes in real quick and fast, it brings a shock and surprise, and it breaks up this stagnancy and dense energy. And so Ozzy had that in Gemini, of course, and close to Taurus, naturally, in the 8th house. So and of course in Gemini, being the sign of communication, he used his voice and his communication to sometimes bring shock and surprise. So we have Mr. Crowley, Suicide Solution, Black Sabbath, and it shows this rebellion that he used when he communicated. And yet all of this created a sense of stability and financial success for him, which is where that Taurus comes in. And also the 8th house. The 8th house is also shared resources. So building his legacy, him and Sharon, they were building their legacy and they shared those resources together. And this placement also indicates an unconventional sex life. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. All right. So the North Node in a natal chart represents your destiny path. And so with the North Node, we have to work to stay on this path. It's not always coming very naturally. It's something that we have to put effort into. And so for Ozzy, his North Node was in Aries. So Aries is all about being a pioneer, being independent, initiating. And so this is what he had to work at in his life. And so one of the ways that he worked at this was he showed up on Geezer Butler's door without socks and, just in a random day, which is very 6th house territory. 6th house represents our daily routines, what we do in our day. And so just in a random time in the day, he shows up on Geezer Butler's door, no socks, and asks him to join his band, which of course led to the formation of Black Sabbath. All right. So a neat aspect pattern in Ozzy's chart is a grand trine. And a grand trine in a chart will be in one element. And in Ozzy's case, it was fire. So this is a really, really awesome placement that I believe really helped him in his life big time. So there's this natural harmony and flow occurring between Saturn, between Saturn, his North Node here, and between both Jupiter and Mars. And so he was able to harness this energy and stay in this flow to stay driven to expand his career, his pursuits, and keeping him, and that just naturally kept him on his path of destiny, North Node. Really neat. All right, now the ascendant, his ascendant is in Libra. And of course, with his ascendant in Libra, that means that his chart ruler is Venus because she rules Libra. And so with your ascendant, a lot of astrologers will say that the ascendant is the face you put onto the world and how people see you. But that is not how I was taught. How I was taught is that, as far as my true sidereal goes, and I resonate with this far more, is the ascendant is who you are becoming. Who, when you signed up to come here to Earth, this you said, I'm working to become this way. And so the sign will give you that vibe. So for Ozzy, that was Libra, which is very suiting with the rest of his chart. And the theory behind that is back in more ancient times, what they would say is when a baby would be born, they would look at the eastern horizon, which is where your ascendant is found on. And they would say, okay, what constellation is on the eastern horizon? That's who he's rising to be. So whatever constellation is rising on the eastern horizon is who we are growing and rising to be. So that's how, and it's fitting. And so life will give him obstacles and situations that he would go through that would try and teach him Libra qualities: peace, harmony, balance, fairness, justice, and peace, And so in Venus being the chart ruler, she played a big role in that. And we can look back at Sharon and Venus representing very feminine energy, positive feminine energy. So she's one of 2 benefic planets that we have, her and Jupiter. And so with Venus, it's like Sharon embodied this Venus quality. I would love to see Sharon's chart as well. But it's like she embodied this Venus quality and really helped him to get through a lot of things. Also, Venus and Venus's vibe was he was creating beauty with his music. And he was expressing the desire for justice, equality, and fairness as well in his songs. And yeah, that was reflected. All right. Now we're going to talk about the Black Moon Lilith, which is different than the other Lilith we talked about earlier. So the Black Moon Lilith is not a physical thing in the sky, rather it's a point. And so his is in Pisces and in the 5th house. And so these are, when you have this placement, it indicates deeply emotional affairs. It highlights more of that unconventional love life, okay? Which we talked about for a hot minute when we said that his Uranus was in the 8th house. So this placement, he had deeply emotional affairs. I can remember in one interview, someone was interviewing Sharon, and he had asked her, I can't remember who he was, but he had asked Sharon, well, what happened with this specific affair that she was talking about? And she said, well, he told me that he was never going to see her again, but he did. So it shows that Black Moon Lilith in the 5th house, where likely these affairs were very emotional in nature. So along with this placement, there's, of course, those conflicting desires, struggle with self-doubt, fear of failure in his creative pursuits. That also relates back to his Pluto in the 9th house, because, of course, his creative pursuits were writing songs, producing songs, which is all, and publishing, which is all very 9th house territory. So that's just another placement that says, okay, there's this fear of my creative pursuits. All right. Now we'll go ahead and talk about his Sagittarius stellium. So when 3 or more planets are in a sign or a house, it's called a stellium. He does have a stellium within his 10th house as well as his 1st house, you could say. But we'll talk about this one in Sagittarius. I think it's quite relevant, especially with his moon being there. So he was internally driven and motivated to not only achieve financial success, but also to achieve personal self-confidence. And he did this by being very free-spirited and adventurous, which is Sagittarius vibes in nature. All right. And at the end of Ozzy's life, he had his North Node trine his ascendant, which indicates that he did follow his destiny, which led him to become that Libra, balanced with his addictions. He was no longer struggling like he was with his addiction. His relationships, especially there towards the end, became a lot more balanced and harmonious. And for example, at his last performance, his final farewell, he, invited everyone that was there and that he had known, and there was peace. There was peace. And so I think that really settled his soul. And therefore, I really think he cleared his karma. I think he cleared the karma. And of course, with that, all of those positions that we talked about earlier in the 12th house, he was supposed to end all of this, and he did. He ended the karma. And so then there's 2 placements that were there on the day that he passed, I believe the 22nd of July. His Jupiter was sextile his MC, showing that he had expanded and grown his reputation and his career with his natural talents, which he did. He also had Jupiter trine Venus, which again shows that he expanded his relationships in a harmonious way and in a balanced way. And of course, he also had his moon in his 8th house when he passed, which indicates that he was surrounded by intimate connections that he shared things with, and that he left a legacy behind. All right. Ozzy created a massive legacy for himself, his family, and for the heavy metal genre. In his final years, he became exactly what he was meant to be, a peaceful, balanced, and diplomatic man while maintaining his Scorpio nature. Rest in peace and power, Ozzy Osbourne. I'm so grateful for his presence here. No matter what's going on in Hollywood right now, he did so much for a lot of us, and I'll be grateful for that forever. And so this is just a bit of a glimpse what you will get if you book a natal chart reading with me. And then I also offer progressions and transits which go into what is going on currently in your life. And some other things I'm working on putting into those reports as well for a bit more insight. So if you'd like to book a session with me or book a natal chart reading, you can go to my website at realskyrevelations.com.